Imagine looking up at the sky and seeing the sun exactly where it has always been. The light is shining. The Earth is turning. Everything feels normal. But somewhere in the universe, something unimaginable has happened. The sun has suddenly disappeared. And for the next 8 minutes, we would have absolutely no idea. Why? Because sunlight does not reach Earth instantly. It travels through space at the speed of light, covering nearly 150 million kilometers between the sun and our planet. That journey takes about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. So if the sun vanished without warning, Earth would continue receiving its light for roughly 8 minutes. For those precious minutes, nothing would seem different. Birds would continue flying. Oceans would continue moving. People would continue walking through streets, working, talking, and living their ordinary lives. The sky would still appear bright. But then, the final sunlight would arrive. Suddenly, daylight would begin to disappear. The sun would not slowly set. There would be no sunrise waiting on the other side of the horizon. The source itself would simply be gone. And something even more frightening would happen at almost the same moment. The sun does not only provide light. Its gravity holds Earth in its orbit. According to general relativity, changes in gravity propagate at the speed of light as well. So when the information that the sun has disappeared finally reached Earth, the gravitational influence keeping Earth in its orbit would also disappear. Earth would no longer circle the sun. Instead, our planet would continue moving forward along the direction it was traveling at that moment, following a path into the darkness of interstellar space. At first, Earth would not freeze instantly. The oceans would still contain enormous amounts of stored heat, and the atmosphere would retain warmth. But without sunlight, the planet's surface would begin a long, devastating cooling process. Plants would be among the first major casualties. Photosynthesis would stop almost immediately. As plants died, the food chains depending on them would begin to collapse. Eventually, temperatures across the planet would fall dramatically. Much of the surface would become frozen. The oceans would begin developing layers of ice from above. Although deep beneath that frozen surface, geothermal energy from Earth's interior could keep some liquid water alive for a very long time. And that creates one of the strangest possibilities. Life might not completely disappear. Deep beneath the surface, around hydrothermal vents and geothermal regions, ecosystems could potentially survive without sunlight. These organisms would not depend on the sun for energy. Instead, they could rely on chemical energy produced by Earth's interior. So even after the sky became permanently black, Earth might still contain pockets of life. But there's another terrifying thought. The stars would become far more visible than ever before. Without the sun dominating our sky, the darkness would reveal a universe that had always been hidden behind daylight. Earth would become a wandering planet, a frozen world traveling through the galaxy without a star to call home. And perhaps that is the most powerful lesson in this scenario. The sun feels permanent because it rises every morning. We build our lives around its predictable light. We measure our days by its movement across the sky. Yet on a cosmic scale, even something as enormous as the sun is part of a universe where nothing is guaranteed to remain unchanged forever. Fortunately, this is only a thought experiment. The sun is not expected to suddenly disappear. It is stable and has billions of years of life remaining. But imagining its disappearance for just 8 minutes reveals something extraordinary. We are living inside a delicate cosmic system, surrounded by forces so vast that we rarely notice them. Every sunrise is more than the first 8 minutes of normality. If the sun suddenly disappeared, Earth would continue receiving sunlight for about 8 minutes, because light takes that long to travel from the sun to Earth. Imagine that the sun suddenly disappeared, but for the first several minutes, absolutely nothing on Earth seemed to change. The sky would remain bright, the oceans would continue moving, and people would carry on with their normal lives. This strange delay happens because sunlight needs time to travel across the enormous distance between the sun and Earth. Even though light moves incredibly fast, it still takes about 8 minutes and 20 seconds to make the journey. That means if the sun vanished at this exact moment, we would continue seeing sunlight for more than 8 minutes. Nobody on Earth would immediately know that anything had happened. The sun would appear completely normal because the last light it produced would still be traveling toward us. During those minutes, Earth would also continue orbiting the sun as if nothing had changed. The planet would keep spinning, airplanes would keep flying, animals would continue moving, and cities would remain filled with activity. It would be an ordinary moment inside an extraordinary cosmic disaster. Then, suddenly, the final sunlight would reach Earth. The brightness of day would disappear, and the sky would become dramatically darker. The stars would begin appearing with astonishing clarity because there would be no sunlight flooding the atmosphere and hiding them. The moon would also become dark if it were not reflecting sunlight. The most frightening part is that Earth would not receive a warning before this happened. The universe gives us no instant message. Information itself has a speed limit. For those 8 minutes, humanity would unknowingly be living inside a world that had already lost its Sunday. Everything would appear normal until the last photons arrived and the darkness finally revealed what had happened. The sunlight suddenly vanishes. After those 8 minutes, daylight would disappear, leaving Earth in permanent darkness, with no sunrise to follow. After roughly 8 minutes, the last sunlight from the sun would finally reach Earth. Then the familiar brightness of daytime would disappear. There would be no gradual sunset caused by the horizon. Instead, the entire planet would suddenly begin experiencing darkness because the source of sunlight itself would no longer exist. The change would be shocking. The sky would become filled with stars that are normally hidden by daylight. The moon would also lose its bright appearance because moonlight is simply reflected sunlight. Across Earth, artificial lights would suddenly become the dominant source of illumination. Cities might glow beneath a sky far darker than anything most people have ever experienced. But darkness would only be the beginning. The sun provides Earth with almost all of the energy that drives its surface environment. Without incoming sunlight, photosynthesis would stop almost immediately. Plants would no longer be able to convert sunlight into chemical energy. Over time, vegetation would begin dying, and organisms that depend on plants for food would face an enormous crisis. Temperatures would not instantly drop to absolute freezing. Earth has oceans, an atmosphere, and enormous amounts of stored thermal energy. These systems would release heat gradually, slowing the cooling process. However, without the sun continuously supplying energy, the planet would eventually become extremely cold. The disappearance of sunlight would also transform Earth's climate. Weather patterns driven by solar heating would weaken dramatically. Winds and atmospheric circulation would change, while the oceans would slowly begin freezing from the surface. Yet beneath that frozen exterior, Earth's interior would remain hot. Geothermal energy could continue warming certain underground environments, creating isolated refuges. Earth escapes the sun's gravity. At the same time the disappearance became observable, the sun's gravitational influence would no longer guide Earth's orbit, causing Earth to travel into interstellar space. But the disappearance of the sun would create a second catastrophe beyond darkness and cold. Earth would no longer have the sun's gravitational pull guiding its orbit. For millions of years, our planet has been traveling around the sun at enormous speed, constantly falling toward it while its forward motion keeps it in orbit. Remove the sun, and that delicate balance would disappear. Earth would not suddenly stop moving. Instead, it would continue traveling forward along a path that would carry it away from the solar system. The planet would effectively become a rogue world, drifting through the Milky Way without a star at its center. This would happen because gravity is not an instantaneous force. Information about changes in the gravitational field propagates at the speed of light. Therefore, Earth would experience the sun's disappearance and the loss of its gravitational influence at approximately the same time that the final sunlight reached us. For those first 8 minutes, Earth would continue following its normal orbit. Then the gravitational connection would effectively vanish, and the planet would begin moving along a new trajectory through space. The change would be almost impossible to notice immediately. There would be no giant explosion beneath our feet, and no sudden feeling of Earth accelerating into space. The planet already possesses enormous orbital velocity. Without the sun's gravity bending its path into an orbit, Earth would simply continue moving in the direction it was already traveling. Over time, the distance between Earth and the other planets would increase. The solar system would become dramatically different, with Earth no longer bound to the sun. Eventually, our planet would enter the vast darkness between stars. The sun would. A frozen Earth, without sunlight, temperatures would gradually plunge, photosynthesis would stop, plants would die, and ecosystems and food chains would begin collapsing. Earth continued traveling through space without the sun. The most devastating change would slowly become impossible to ignore. The planet would begin to freeze. At first, the temperature would not collapse instantly because Earth's atmosphere and oceans store enormous amounts of heat. The oceans would continue releasing warmth into the atmosphere, giving the planet a temporary buffer against the growing cold. But that stored energy would eventually run out. Without sunlight, the surface would lose heat continuously. Temperatures would fall farther and farther, transforming familiar landscapes into frozen environments. Plants would be among the first victims because photosynthesis requires sunlight. As vegetation disappeared, herbivores would lose their primary food source, followed by predators and countless other organisms. Entire ecosystems would begin collapsing. The oceans would also change dramatically. Ice would gradually form across their surfaces, creating a frozen layer that could become increasingly thick. However, the deepest parts of some oceans might remain liquid for a very long time because Earth is still warm inside. Radioactive elements and residual heat from the planet's formation continue producing geothermal energy beneath the crust. This underground heat could become one of the last sources of energy available to life. Deep beneath Earth's surface, microorganisms already exist in environments completely isolated from sunlight. Around hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, entire ecosystems can survive using chemical energy rather than direct solar energy. If the sun disappeared, similar environments could potentially become some of the final refuges for life. The Earth would become a frozen world on the outside, yet potentially alive beneath its surface. Darkness would. Life could survive in the darkness. Even on a frozen Earth, some life might survive deep underground or around hydrothermal vents by using geothermal and chemical energy instead of sunlight. Even after the sun disappeared and Earth's surface became frozen, the story of life might not necessarily end. One of the most fascinating possibilities is that some organisms could survive without sunlight at all. On Earth today, life already exists in places where sunlight barely reaches or never reaches, including deep underground environments and the depths of the oceans. Near hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, microorganisms use chemical energy to survive. These ecosystems do not depend directly on sunlight. Instead, they rely on chemicals released from Earth's interior. If the planet became a rogue world, similar environments could remain active because Earth's internal heat would continue long after the surface had frozen. The deepest oceans could therefore become unexpected refuges. Thick layers of ice might cover the water above, but geothermal heat rising from below could prevent some underground reservoirs from freezing completely. Beneath the surface, microorganisms could continue living, reproducing, and adapting to their increasingly isolated environment. Human technology might also extend survival. Nuclear power and geothermal energy could provide artificial heat and electricity for underground settlements. Humans could potentially construct enormous enclosed habitats where artificial lighting supports agriculture and recycling systems provide water and oxygen. Such communities would be completely separated from the frozen surface. Above them, Earth would drift silently through the Milky Way. There would be no sunrise, no warm summer afternoons, and no golden horizon. The sun would exist only as a memory of the world that once was. Yet even in that darkness, Earth would not necessarily become completely lifeless. Its interior would remain hot, its chemists